Than 100,000 people are without power after a destructive windstorm overnight.
What the?
Guys, is this a UFO? Or like a meteor?
Something has quietly pushed the United States out of balance. Across the Midwest, long cracks are appearing in farmland overnight, splitting the earth in straight lines. Far to the west, a massive deep-water anomaly is moving beneath the surface. Meanwhile, entire clusters of evergreen trees in Montana turned brown almost overnight, making the winter habitat for wildlife anything but normal. Then comes another disturbance that rises far from land. In the retreating river in Arizona, a perfectly circular stone disk etched with ancient symbols has been uncovered, matching the strange sky patterns recorded above the region. Coincidence? Or signs aligning faster than we can interpret? Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and stay with us, because what comes next may change how you understand this moment. Let's examine what truly happened across the Midwest first. In the early hours before sunrise, farmers are waking up to something they have never seen before. Long, straight fractures are appearing in fields overnight, cutting through soil, slicing across property lines, and stretching farther than a single farm can measure. These aren't the jagged lines left behind after storms or tremors. Geologists have begun surveying the fractures. Some point to underground erosion. Others suggest shifting aquifers. But none of these explanations account for the speed, the scale, or the straight-line geometry appearing across multiple counties at the same time. What troubles residents most is not just the cracks themselves, but the feeling that the ground is no longer behaving the way it always has. The land does not look violently damaged. It looks altered, divided, as if something beneath the surface has shifted quietly, without announcing itself. The Bible warns us that before anything falls, the foundation weakens. Collapse doesn't begin at the moment we see it. It begins long before, hidden beneath the surface, where pressure builds quietly until the structure can no longer hold. Scripture often uses the image of splitting ground to illustrate this idea. What appears stable on top may already be compromised below. This is why these cracks feel different from ordinary geological events, because they are not devastating. They have not brought down houses. Instead, they show that something once whole is disconnected. Was it a new kind of natural disaster? Is this nature misbehaving? Or is it a summons asking to be recognized? If this is the first sign, then the next parts are even more disturbing. Stay with us. What happens next along the water's edge raises even bigger questions. Just before dawn, a group of fishermen were sailing near the port of Portland when the air was still. The ocean was smooth, and then suddenly the water began to darken, as if something enormous was moving beneath them. One fisherman later described it as if the water was holding its breath. Before anyone knew what was happening, the sea just a few meters away rose, and a long, towering neck rose from the depths. It was pale, rugged, and dripping with seabed mud, its neck taller than the boat itself. A few seconds later, a huge arch emerged behind it, creating a circular wave that rocked the small boat. The onlookers were stunned, speechless. Someone in the crew picked up a phone and recorded, spreading 8 seconds of unrecognized footage across social media. And that was the confusion. The Pacific Northwest is not home to any large aquatic animal. No known species has a neck that long. No known eel large enough to create such a shape. No known sturgeon capable of creating such a massive arch. And certainly, no known whale that can rise vertically out of the water. Marine biologists tried to explain, but all failed. The size didn't match. The movement didn't match any known species. The shape wasn't right. Everything was wrong. And as the confusion grew, believers from across the United States began making a different connection. A biblical one. The book of Revelation describes creatures rising from the deep as signs that precede great upheavals and divine warnings. For many, the creature's appearance wasn't random. It was symbolic, purposeful, a message. And whether one believes in prophecy or not, the timing was hard to ignore. This encounter wasn't just another ocean anomaly. It happened in the same period America began splitting. A creature unknown to science, moving with intention, appearing at a moment when the nation is already trembling. It forces us to ask, why now? What is happening under the waters of the United States, and why is it surfacing at this moment in history? And while the sea reveals a shape no one can fully identify, the northern forests begin shedding their color in ways no season can explain. Before we move on, please give us a like and subscribe to support us. Every contribution helps. Across Montana, clusters of evergreen trees, normally resilient, stable, and green through winter, have started turning brown almost overnight. Entire hillsides that should stand as deep forests of emerald now appear faded, brittle, and strangely uniform in their decline. To the people who live near these forests, this is not normal. Evergreens don't change color suddenly. They don't dry out in one night. They don't lose life simultaneously across multiple elevations. Foresters and botanists rushed to assess the damage. Some initially suspected disease, but diseases spread gradually, not all at once. Others suggested temperature shock, but there were no extreme temperature drops recorded. No frost, no heat wave, no chemical exposure. The trees simply shifted from vibrant green to dull brown, as if someone drained their life from the inside out. What makes this event especially concerning is not just its unusualness, but its consequence. Animals that normally take shelter in these trees, elk, deer, and smaller mammals, seem to be avoiding the region entirely, leaving behind an uneasy silence. In many parts of Scripture, trees are used as symbols of strength, endurance, and stability. When they wither suddenly, it often reflects deeper instability beneath the surface. These trees turned brown just as the ground began to split in the Midwest and marine life began to rise in Oregon. 3 different regions. 3 different systems, soil, sea, and forest, reacting in close succession. And as people try to understand why life is disappearing in the north, another discovery emerges, this time from the heart of the desert, where falling water levels expose something ancient that should have remained buried. In Arizona, shrinking river levels have exposed a section of riverbed that has remained underwater for generations. What first looked like a smooth, rounded boulder quickly turned into something far more deliberate. A perfectly circular stone disk, carved with precise edges and set flush against the earth. Archaeologists were called in, expecting erosion patterns or tribal markings. Instead, they found symbols. Not random scratches, not natural fractures, but lines, arcs, and geometric shapes arranged in a way that suggests intention and intelligence. Residents who came to see the site say it feels different from the usual archaeological find. There is no sense of discovery, only exposure. Like something hidden for centuries is surfacing because the environment around it is shifting too quickly for it to stay buried. Even more unsettling is what happened next. As researchers compared these markings with recent atmospheric footage, They found a correlation. The shapes etched into the stone mirror, the strange patterns recorded in the sky, above the region spirals, circles, and overlapping rings that appeared at dusk, held their form for a few minutes, then dissolved. Scripture often speaks of buried things being revealed in their appointed time, not as omens, but as signs that hidden structures eventually come to light when foundations are disturbed. And that word disturbed seems to describe everything happening now. Because while humans are focused on what's appearing in front of them, the atmosphere around the country begins shifting in a way no forecast model can explain. Residents from North Carolina to Virginia woke up to find the shoreline pulled unusually far back, exposing wide stretches of ocean floor normally hidden beneath the waves. It wasn't a storm surge, it wasn't a tsunami warning, and it wasn't caused by strong offshore winds. There was no obvious trigger. In some areas, boats sat tilted in the sand, as if the ocean had simply stepped backward. The waters surged forward hours before the expected tide, swallowing boardwalks and parking lots that were dry earlier that morning. Experts rushed to provide explanations: atmospheric pressure fluctuations, a rare localized seisha, or a temporary shift in ocean currents. But none of these answers matched the timing or the scale, because the same pattern repeated the next day, then again, miles away, without consistency or cycle. Local fishermen described something they'd never felt before. The ocean was breathing wrong. For coastal communities dependent on the rhythm of the tide, that rhythm is more than nature, it's stability. So when the ocean moves unpredictably, the unease is immediate. Historically and symbolically, water has always been portrayed as the first element to react to deeper, unseen shifts. And in Scripture, sudden movement of the sea marks a moment when the natural world signals imbalance. Luke 21:25 refers to the sea and the waves roaring, not as noise, but as signs of disorder rising before the human eye can interpret it. And as unexplained tide patterns ripple across the Atlantic coast, another phenomenon begins to surface not in the water, but in the air above the nation. From New Mexico to Pennsylvania, thousands of residents reported the same strange experience: a low-frequency hum vibrating through walls, windows, and even the ground beneath their feet. Not loud, not painful, just there, persistent, steady, and impossible to trace. It wasn't coming from highways, it wasn't coming from factories, and it wasn't coming from power stations. Because when authorities temporarily shut down electrical grids in affected areas, the hum continued. Some described it as a deep engine idling underground. Others said it felt more like pressure inside the chest rather than a sound in the ears. Pets reacted first, pacing, whining, refusing to rest long before people noticed it. When acoustic engineers brought specialized equipment to measure the frequency, they found something unexpected. The vibration wasn't localized. It appeared everywhere, evenly distributed, without a clear point of origin. One researcher admitted, "It's not traveling through the air, it's traveling through the earth." But perhaps the most unsettling detail is timing. The hum began just days after sudden cracking of farmland in the Midwest. Throughout history, Scripture often describes the earth as groaning before major upheavals, not violently, but quietly. Romans 8:22 says, "The whole creation groans and labors," not with earthquakes, not with storms, but with tension. A kind of warning that begins beneath awareness long before visible change arrives. This hum doesn't destroy anything. It doesn't damage property. It doesn't create chaos. But it does one thing extremely well. It gets noticed. Because humans can ignore storms, tides, even cracks in the earth, but they cannot ignore a sound that follows them everywhere. And as people search for the source of the vibration, another phenomenon begins unfolding overhead. Not below us, but above us, where the very sky begins to change. Across several states in the Midwest and Northeast, people woke up to skies that looked wrong. Not stormy, not smoky, just colorless. From Ohio to Wisconsin, the sky took on a flat, metallic tint, neither blue nor gray, almost like someone had drained the pigment from the atmosphere. Even during midday, the light stayed muted, as if filtered through a layer that didn't exist the day before. Smartphone cameras captured the effect, but footage could not replicate the unsettling feeling of seeing it in person. Drivers reported difficulty judging distance. Pilots mentioned losing the natural horizon line. Even animals paused, hesitant, as though the world above them had shifted. Meteorologists suggested high-altitude aerosols, atmospheric scattering, or ice crystals reflecting sunlight incorrectly. But none of those explanations addressed the most unusual detail. The colorless sky appeared in regions with completely different weather systems at the same time, stretching across hundreds of miles like a single sheet pulled overhead. For many, the atmosphere felt less like weather and more like a curtain being lowered. In Scripture, the sky is often used as a silent messenger, not through storms or lightning, but through changes in appearance. Joel 2:10 describes, "The heavens tremble, the sun and moon grow dim, not vanish, not darken completely, but lose clarity." The kind of dimming that signals imbalance rather than disaster. The sky doesn't need to roar to send a message. Sometimes all it has to do is stop looking like itself. And as people stepped outside beneath this pale, washed-out dome, many reported the same strange detail. Shadows looked softer, edges blurred. Nothing felt sharp or defined. It was as if depth itself had been reduced. Combined with the unexplained hum beneath the ground, the colorless sky wasn't simply visual, it was contextual. A world out of rhythm begins showing it in every direction. And just as Americans were adjusting to this muted, drained horizon, another phenomenon emerged, this time at night. It starts in Kansas. Residents capture flashes across the horizon, the brief bursts of white light illuminating the sky for several seconds at a time. Not lightning bolts, not flickers, just sudden, silent brightness spreading across the clouds, then disappearing. Within hours, videos from Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Missouri begin circulating online, all showing the same strange pattern: a sky that lights up without thunder, without storms, without any sound at all. Meteorologists checked radar. There were no storm cells, no electrical buildup, no atmospheric instability that would normally trigger lightning. The National Weather Service issued a statement suggesting distant lightning too far to hear, dry lightning without precipitation, or reflections from distant electrical discharges. But these explanations fell apart for one simple reason. There were no storms within 300 miles of the recorded flashes. Even more unusual, the light did not move like traditional lightning. It didn't strike downward. It didn't travel horizontally. Instead, it seemed to pulse as if the sky itself was briefly illuminated from within. For many witnesses, the silence was what felt most unnatural. In Scripture, unusual light in the sky is often described not as destruction, but as a form of signal. Zechariah 14:6-7 speaks of a day when there will be light, not day nor night, but at evening time it shall be light. A moment when the atmosphere does something it has not done before, not to frighten, but to draw attention. Whether one views it spiritually or scientifically, the meaning remains the same. Light appearing without cause is always a message. But a message of what? As the silent flashes continue, Americans begin to sense the same emerging truth. These events are no longer isolated. They are no longer accidental. They are no longer explainable on their own. Something is connecting them. And that connection becomes unavoidable in the final convergence, where the earth, the oceans, and the sky begin to move in rhythm, as though responding to the same unseen force. Explanations that all sounded reasonable when viewed one by one. But when placed side by side, a pattern begins to surface. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. These are not the same type of event. They involve different forces, different elements, different regions. Yet the timing is the same. And when nature breaks its rhythm in multiple directions at once, it raises a question we can't ignore. Is the problem in the events themselves, or in the system holding them together? Scientists offer possibilities for each phenomenon, but even the experts quietly acknowledge the complication. None of these explanations account for simultaneous timing. Because geological systems, oceanic systems, and atmospheric systems do not normally fail in the same week unless something connects them. It's the alignment that feels unusual, the synchronicity. Throughout history and scripture, convergence has always carried meaning, not necessarily doom, but attention, awareness, a moment when nature stops whispering and begins speaking clearly. As Luke 21:11 describes, there will be great earthquakes, famines, and signs from the heavens. Not one sign, not a single tragedy, but signs, plural, occurring in layers. Different forces, same moment. The purpose is not fear. It is recognition. Because when the ground, the oceans, and the sky begin to shift in harmony, it suggests a deeper imbalance, something not yet visible, but already in motion. The United States isn't facing one disaster. It is facing a pattern of systems slipping out of sync with each other. And when natural systems fall out of rhythm, human systems soon follow. But this is not the end of the pattern, because even as these 8 signs converge, something else is beginning to emerge, a new wave of anomalies rising in places no one expected. Across Washington state, winter weather shifted with almost no warning. Forecasts called for scattered showers and mild cold fronts, but within hours, the situation escalated far beyond anything predicted. In the low-lying areas near Seattle and Tacoma, heavy rain fell so quickly that drainage systems were overwhelmed. Streets turned into streams. Parking lots disappeared beneath water. Homes in quiet neighborhoods found themselves surrounded before sunrise. But while the west side flooded, the interior of the state faced a completely different threat. Up in the Cascades, snow began piling at an unnatural speed, first inches, then feet. Mountain passes closed, one after another. I-90 was forced to halt traffic as visibility dropped to near zero and plows couldn't keep up. What should have been routine winter weather became a sudden shutdown of one of the most critical transportation routes in the Pacific Northwest. And east of the mountains, towns in the Columbia Basin experienced both extremes within hours. Flooded roads, frozen power lines, and heavy snow weighing down rooftops that were never meant to carry that burden. What unsettled emergency crews was not just the intensity, but the timing. These storms didn't build slowly. They didn't announce themselves gradually like traditional winter systems. They arrived quickly, stacked on top of each other, hitting agricultural zones, shipping corridors, and communities all at once. Weather experts could explain the mechanics. Atmospheric rivers meeting cold air, pressure systems merging, rapid elevation changes. but even they admitted the speed of escalation was unusual. In the Bible, famine never begins the day food runs out. It begins earlier, when the land can no longer produce reliably, when disruptions strike the regions that feed people, when storms hit not randomly, but strategically. Scripture often frames these moments as warnings before failure, not punishments, shifts in the natural order that signal instability before the human eye fully perceives it. Washington has always known winter. Storms are not new. Snow is not new. Flooding is not unheard of. But the deeper question remains. Why are these disruptions striking multiple critical regions at the same time? Why does the land seem stressed, stopping transportation, agriculture, and daily life simultaneously? As the storms move on, leaving damage behind, something else emerges, not through wind or snow, but through water that begins to behave in a way no one expected. Late at night, along a quiet stretch of the Mississippi River, near a small riverside town, the water began to glow. At first, it was faint, just a soft shimmer beneath the surface. Then, slowly, the light expanded outward, forming a pale, steady glow that spread across the river like a veil. There were no boats on the water, no lightning in the sky, no passing headlights to reflect off the surface. The light did not descend from above, it rose from within. Residents who stepped outside expecting to see calm, dark water instead saw something that defied their understanding. A river, illuminated from the inside, glowing as though something deep beneath the surface had awakened. What struck witnesses the most was not fear, but silence. People did not shout. They did not run. They simply stopped and watched, as though the moment itself demanded stillness. Several described the light as too controlled to be a reflection. Others said it felt calm, almost intentional. No one could explain why it appeared, or why it lingered longer than any natural phenomenon normally would. Scientists later suggested possibilities: bioluminescent algae, chemical reflections, unusual mineral concentrations. More importantly, it was winter, not a season known for biological light. But the meaning goes deeper than mechanics. In Scripture, water often represents the unknown, the depths that existed before creation was shaped. And when light emerges from that depth, it follows the same pattern found in Genesis. Let there be light, before order, before separation, before understanding. Light appears first, not to destroy anything, but to reveal the truth hidden beneath the surface. The timing matters. It came after storms disrupted essential regions in the Pacific Northwest. It came after the land showed signs of strain. And it came before any warning or judgment, quiet, gentle, unmistakable. So the question is not whether the light is natural or supernatural. The question is, why did it appear now after the storms and before anything else? What is the river revealing before the next shift arrives? And as the Mississippi returns to darkness, something unusual begins appearing on land, heavy stones standing upright where no one placed them. After days of heavy rainfall swept across Tennessee, floodwaters finally began to recede. Roads reopened, creeks settled. The land exhaled after being pushed to its limit. But when residents returned to survey the damage, they found something that did not match the chaos of a storm. Something still, quiet, and unsettling. Across several fields outside small towns near the Cumberland Plateau, large stones were standing upright, not stacked, not arranged, simply standing balanced vertically in the softened ground, as if deliberately placed there. These were not light pebbles that could be shifted by flowing water. Many were heavy, irregular, awkwardly shaped. Some stood 3 or 4 feet tall. Yet, there were no tire tracks, no machinery marks, no footprints leading toward them. The mud around the stones was smooth, undisturbed. Residents who approached the scene struggled to explain what they were seeing. Floodwater can move debris, but it does not lift stones of this size into a vertical position and leave them perfectly balanced. One farmer described the site this way: "It looked like the land arranged itself, and then just stopped." Another witness said, "The stones felt less like debris and more like markers, the kind you would expect to see in an ancient site, not a Tennessee field." What made the scene even stranger was the consistency. In multiple locations, the stones faced the same direction, as though oriented by something other than chance, not chaotic, not random, almost intentional. And yet, no intent could be identified. Stones are rarely background objects. They appear as witnesses, boundaries, reminders of moments meant to be remembered. When people built altars or memorials, they did not carve grand monuments. They lifted stones and set them upright. Not because the stones spoke, but because their position carried meaning. Many recalled when Joshua 4 described stones taken from the Jordan River and placed as a testimony, silent markers of a moment when the land shifted and people were meant to take notice. Why did the land leave them standing? Why now? Why in this formation? Because when creation reshapes itself in ways that defy ordinary patterns, it often signals a change beneath the surface. A shift that is quiet, subtle, and easy to miss if people look only at the damage and not at what remains. And as these silent stones continue standing in Tennessee fields, another sign begins to emerge, not in fields, not in forests, but beneath the very ground Americans walk on, where collapse begins without a sound. In multiple states, from Virginia to Missouri to parts of northern Alabama, the earth began to give way with almost no warning, not through dramatic earthquakes, not through violent storms, but through quiet, sudden collapse. A residential street in suburban Virginia woke up to find a portion of the road sinking several feet into the ground. No tremor was felt, no prior cracking. The land simply lowered itself overnight. In Missouri, a backyard opened into a narrow sinkhole, small at the surface, but deep enough that emergency crews blocked off the area within minutes. Neighbors said the spot looked completely normal the day before. And in Alabama, a hillside shifted silently after days of mild rain, not with crashing rocks or roaring mud, but with a slow, unsettling slide that pushed trees forward like they were on a conveyor belt. Whole trunks leaned at the same angle, tilted but unbroken, as though carried along by invisible hands. The quietness is what unnerves people the most. There is no sound of warning, no shaking to signal danger. Just stillness, and then movement, where there should be none. Experts explain the mechanisms: soil saturation, erosion beneath the surface, limestone dissolving, underground cavities expanding over time. All of those things are true, but none fully explain why these collapses are happening so widely and so close together, in regions with different soil types, different climates, and different geological histories. Even geologists admit that while they can describe the how, the why now remains unclear. Scripture described moments when collapse is a process that begins long before anyone sees the results. The foundation weakens out of sight. Pressure builds quietly. What appears sudden is usually the final stage of something that has been shifting for a long time. Jesus taught this principle through the image of a house built on sand, not because the storm was extraordinary, but because the foundation had been compromised before the first drop of rain fell. This is the unsettling truth reflected in these recent events. The ground looks stable, right until the moment it isn't. And if the earth can give way without sound, without tremors, without visible warning, it raises a deeper question. How many other foundations, physical or otherwise, are weakening long before anyone sees the signs? Because while these sinkholes and landslides are still being measured and mapped, they reveal something larger, that the land underneath daily life may not be as secure as people assume. Before we conclude, please give us a like and subscribe to support us. Every contribution helps. Thanks so much.
Growing fear in a Florida neighborhood tonight with that giant sinkhole now widening.
June the 10th, and look at this in the sky. So I was out here last night and I caught something unexplainable.
Tonight, a heavy atmosphere hangs over America as a series of unusual events unfold. In California and Florida, sudden sinkholes and landslides are appearing without warning, making the ground no longer safe enough to stay on. As the ground gives way, creatures from the seabed drift ashore, adding to the already overloaded surface. Soon after, a group of ancient trees died almost overnight, as if their sprawling root systems could no longer cling to the soil where they had stood for centuries. The question is no longer whether something is happening, but why they are appearing together right now. If you are ready to connect the dots, join the watch. Subscribe and like this video, because what we are about to reveal may change how you see these days. Across California and Florida, the land itself has begun to give way without warning. Sinkholes open suddenly beneath streets and neighborhoods. Landslides tear through hillsides. In some areas, the earth does not collapse all at once, but slowly sinks, as if the ground itself is growing tired of holding what was placed upon it. Entire sections of land subside, damaging homes, roads, pipelines, and power lines, forcing families to evacuate with little time to react. What was once solid and dependable now feels no longer trustworthy. What makes these events warrant more serious consideration is, first and foremost, what didn't happen, and more deeply, the truth behind it. No major storms. No visible catastrophe to explain the destruction. Instead, the collapse came quietly. Beneath the surface, water had been eroding rock and soil for years. Patient, persistent, unseen. Cavities widened, supports thinned, pressure accumulated. Then, without spectacle or sound, the ground failed. In several locations, clusters of collapses appeared near known fault lines, but no seismic activity was recorded. Some residents described the sensation as if the land had shifted without shaking, like a silent earthquake that left no tremor, only absence. Experts explain the science. Limestone dissolving, underground voids forming, soil losing cohesion. Yet for those living above it, the fear goes beyond mechanics. Residents describe a deeper unease, the feeling that stability itself is an illusion. The ground may look firm, appear obedient and still, but underneath, something is already unraveling. This exact image was not only a mere warning used by national television stations, but more profoundly, by Jesus. Scripture speaks of foundations that appear strong, yet are already compromised beneath the surface. Jesus himself warned of houses built on ground that could not endure when pressure finally came. It begins quietly, out of sight, until the weight becomes too much to bear. This is what makes these events difficult to dismiss. They are not isolated accidents, nor are they spread out over generations. They are occurring within the same narrow window of time, quietly, repeatedly, across key regions of the nation. The pattern suggests more than random failure. The question, then, is not why the ground collapses. Nature has always done that. The deeper question is why it is happening now across multiple states, without dramatic warning, without a single defining trigger, but with more diverse forms. Why are foundations failing in silence, as if the collapse itself is meant to be noticed only after it is already complete? According to Scripture, moments like this are not merely disasters. They are messages, and they are not alone. They remind us that what appears secure on the surface may already be unstable beneath it. And when foundations fail, everything built upon them is forced into reckoning, not by force, but by truth. As the ground gives way beneath cities and communities, the warning does not end below our feet. The pattern continues elsewhere. The next sign does not rise from the land, but from beneath the ocean, where the deep begins to release what it has long been commanded to hold. Along the west coast of the United States, a strange pattern has begun to emerge. Multiple deep-sea creatures, species that normally inhabit depths far beyond human reach, have been washing ashore alive and largely uninjured. They appear along different stretches of coastline, separated by hundreds of miles, yet discovered within days of one another. These are not animals known to migrate toward land or surface naturally. They are shaped for darkness, crushing pressure, and prolonged isolation. But they now rest quietly in open air, on beaches where they have no biological reason to be. What particular unsettling is not a single sighting, but the accumulation of them and how closely they cluster in time. Creatures documented at depths exceeding 1,000 meters. Anglerfish, deep-water scavengers, organisms rarely seen even by submersibles, have appeared intact, alive, and strangely calm. They bear no marks of violent ascent, no torn tissue, no signs of panic. They are not fleeing storms. They are not escaping predators. They simply arrive as if something below has shifted and the deep itself has loosened its grip. Explanations are still being given. Some point to subtle temperature gradients, underwater seismic disturbances too minor to register on land, or slow changes in deep ocean currents. Others suggest pressure anomalies or chemical shifts. However, even these explanations struggle to account for the pattern's coordination and timing. These appearances are not scattered across decades. They are unfolding within the same narrow window, quietly synchronized, geographically distant, yet temporally aligned. What stood was not merely water. The sea always represents what is hidden, restrained, and beyond human command. It is the realm of mystery, chaos held in check by divine order. When the Bible speaks of the sea giving up what it holds, it is describing moments of unveiling times when what was concealed is no longer permitted to remain unseen. In Revelation, the sea releases its contents before judgment unfolds. The deep does not rebel. It obeys a signal. These moments are not always violent. Sometimes they arrive without spectacle, calm, almost reverent. Yet they carry an unease precisely because nothing appears wrong on the surface. Boundaries that once seemed fixed begin to soften. Limits assumed permanent begin to fail. When creatures adapted exclusively to crushing darkness rise without injury or resistance, the question is unavoidable. What has changed in the depths? And if the sea long, the symbol of what is withheld, has begun to disclose what it once concealed, what else may be storming the surface? Revelation often precedes reckoning in scriptures. Signs appear before events fully unfold, not to incite panic, but to invite discernment. They are given as warnings to those willing to watch. Here, we can pause for a moment to feel, to evaluate, not to consider whether these events are real or not, but to consider their significance. For some have argued that if they meant nothing, why do we all, individually or collectively, believe they must be based on something, a reason for them all happening almost simultaneously across the United States? Because once everyone is focused on one place, at the same time, with all eyes on the same target, then what comes next is what truly matters. In Ohio, witnesses reported a moment that was both simple and quietly unsettling. As dusk settled over the Ohio Valley, with no storm systems on radar and no atmospheric alerts issued, a cross-shaped light appeared in the sky, clear, steady, and unmistakably formed. There was no thunder, no lightning, no turbulence in the clouds, no aircraft, drones, or flight paths reported in the area at the time. The light did not flicker or pulse. It did not descend or rotate. It held its shape, suspended in silence, visible long enough to be recognized, and then slowly faded from view. What stood out most was not only what appeared, but how people responded. There was no panic, no shouting, no rush to explain it away. Witnesses described an instinctive stillness, as if conversation itself felt out of place. People stood, watching quietly, unsure of what they were witnessing. The moment felt calm, yet weighty, as though it carried meaning without offering interpretation. Signs in the heavens through a biblical lens are never meant to terrify by their presence alone. They are meant to arrest attention, to interrupt routine, to invite reflection. The Bible speaks of signs in the sky as signals, markers placed in plain sight, indicating that something significant is unfolding, not always immediately, but soon. The symbol itself matters. The cross is not an emblem of destruction. It is a sign that appears before judgment, not after it. In biblical language, the cross represents mercy extended ahead of consequence. It is an invitation offered while time still remains a call to pause, to turn, to consider one's direction before paths become fixed. The especially striking side of this event is how gently it occurred. There was no force behind it, no command attached, no explanation provided. The light made no demand of belief. It did not compel action. It simply appeared and then withdrew, leaving behind not certainty, but a question. Scripture often shows that the clearest warnings are not the loudest. They arrive without spectacle, without fear, and without coercion. They are calm, unmistakable, and easy to dismiss. A quiet sign tests not belief, but attentiveness. Whether people are watching or waiting for something louder, maybe something we used to rely on for breathing. So the question remains, why does this symbol appear now? Why without thunder or terror? Why without display or drama? The Bible teaches that mercy always precedes wrath, and warning comes before judgment. The cross in the sky may not mark the end, but it may mark the narrowing of time, for the sea, for the land, for us, and for even those things once thought to be long-living. As signs emerge almost all over the nation, the next warning appears on land, not with noise or motion, but through stillness. In California, a line of ancient trees, some of them hundreds of years old, died almost simultaneously. They were spread across the same region, rooted in the same soil, yet collapsed as one. Within just 48 hours, what had endured centuries of storms, droughts, fires, and human expansion suddenly gave way. Why is this event so disturbing? Maybe not what happened, but what did not happen. There was no wildfire racing through the area, no visible infestation or disease moving from trunk to trunk, no prolonged season of decline, no yellowing leaves, no gradual weakening. The trees did not fade. They failed. Life that had endured generation after generation came to an abrupt and collective end. For many, these trees were more than landscape. They were markers of permanence, silent witnesses to history itself. They had survived climate shifts, earthquakes, floods, and the steady encroachment of modern life. Their sudden death shattered the assumption that longevity guarantees protection. If something so old, so deeply rooted, can fall without warning, then what truly qualifies as secure? Trees carry layered meaning, not only for our physical life, but also for our spiritual life. They represent life, endurance, blessing, and moral condition. A healthy tree is a sign of favor and continuity. But Scripture also issues a warning. A tree that no longer bears fruit will not stand indefinitely. Jesus himself used trees as metaphors for people and nations. Those rooted in truth flourish. Those hollowed out from within eventually collapse. The sudden loss of these ancient trees feels less like slow environmental attrition and more like a moment of exposure, a signal of transition, a compression of time. What once unfolded over decades now happens in days. The pace itself becomes part of the message, part of the story of the Golden State's dirt. This forces an uncomfortable question. When life that survived centuries fails all at once, what is being revealed? Is it merely stress within the system, or a reminder that endurance without purpose is not preservation? Far from California, yet bound by timing rather than distance, another hidden thing surfaced. Deep beneath the soil of Texas, workers uncovered a stone slab engraved with symbols some interpret as referencing an end time or final era. The stone was buried far below the surface, sealed beneath layers of earth that suggest deliberate concealment, hidden from view for generations until now. This discovery raises concerns among both skeptics and believers because of not only the implications of the markings, but their origin. The symbols do not align cleanly with modern tools, recent activity, or any well-documented local civilization. They resemble a form of ordered inscription, intentional, methodical, and preserved.
The urgent rescue effort after a deadly explosion rocked a nursing home outside Philadelphia.
Across America, a series of unusual events is beginning to tell the same disturbing story. Streams in Pennsylvania blaze, revealing the forgettable past beneath towns thought to have buried it. Then fire reappeared even in paradise, but in a completely different form. What was deemed necessary was taken away, leaving an unforgettable memory that still lingers in the minds of those who witnessed. A similar situation occurred with inhabitants in the Texas plains. Areas once abundant in food, the source of livelihood for a vast region, were swept away by the very thing that had once provided it. None of these scenes can be reduced to a headline or a single cause. Together, they feel like questions being written into a distracted nation that has tried for years not to ask. Why are they happening now? Are these signs to pull our attention back on track? If you sense that something deeper is unfolding, comment, "I'm waiting." Like this video and subscribe to share your readiness, because awareness comes before understanding. Residents in a quiet corner of Pennsylvania say their local creek is no longer just a creek. It's a place where water burns. At first, it seemed like an odd party trick. Videos from one small valley showed teenagers lighting a patch of water in a shallow brook and watching a line of fire skim across the surface. But within days, similar clips surfaced from other streets, other farms, other creeks, sometimes miles apart. Homeowners say they turned on the tap, struck a match out of curiosity and saw the sink itself flare up for a moment before the flame went out. Officials are no longer calling it a coincidence. County authorities declared a limited state of emergency in parts of the region, asking families near affected streams and wells to avoid using open flames and to ventilate basements. Volunteer fire departments have gone door to door, checking for gas odors and unexpected bubbling in private wells. Some residents have been temporarily relocated after air monitors detected elevated levels of methane around their homes. Scientists say the basic mechanism is clear, even if the full story is not. Geologists and environmental engineers point to a combination of aging gas infrastructure, old storage wells, and natural seepage from deep rock layers. In Pennsylvania alone, tens of thousands of oil and gas wells, some drilled more than a century ago, are known or suspected to leak methane into the ground and water. Yet, even the experts admit they are looking at more than an isolated leak. Recent measurements suggest that methane emissions from oil and gas facilities in Pennsylvania reach hundreds of thousands of tons per year, far higher than official inventories once assumed. The current situation has raised new questions. How long has this gas been moving underfoot? Historical records show that in the 19th century, burning springs in this region helped spark some of America's earliest oil and gas developments, drawing speculators, drillers, and fortune seekers to the area. A quirk of nature quickly became a signpost for profit, energy, and eventually global dependence on fossil fuels. But if the pursuit of something is finite, how long will it take to continue? For people who read the Bible, the image is hard to ignore. When a stream of water carries a line of fire across its surface, it raises more than technical questions. Perhaps the real burning exposed here is not the gas under the stream, but the desires of the heart above it. The Bible speaks of a day when everything concealed will be brought into the light. That light just happens in Pennsylvania. And the question it leaves hanging over the footage is simple. What are we really doing with the treasures God buried in the ground, serving temporary brightness? It demands a serious reevaluation of our approach, not simply regarding resource exploitation, but also our attitude toward being granted privileges. Appreciation is gratitude. A lack of appreciation leads to consequences. Those who follow the news and have seen what just happened in the Aloha State will probably understand this best. What unfolds next is even more unsettling because this time the fire did not stay underground. On the island of Maui, what many called paradise on earth turned into a landscape where even the most basic conditions for life could no longer be taken for granted. By late afternoon, hurricane-force winds, months of drought, and fast-burning non-native grasses combined into a single racing inferno that overran the historic town of Lahaina in a matter of hours. Witnesses describe a day that began like any other windy morning on the west side of the island. A brush fire flared up outside Lahaina, was reported contained, then seemed to die down. But as gusts over 80 miles per hour hammered the hillsides, power poles snapped, lines fell, and embers were driven sideways like bullets. By mid-afternoon, flames that had been considered under control suddenly reignited and began to move with terrifying speed toward the town. What happened next now sits at the center of investigations and grief. With sirens silent and communications down, many residents received no clear warning. They saw smoke, then embers, then walls of fire appearing at the edges of their streets. By 4:46 p.m., the fire had jumped the highway and surged into central Lahaina, trapping cars in bumper-to-bumper traffic as people tried to flee. Some had no choice but to abandon their vehicles and run for their lives. Others sprinted toward the only refuge left, the ocean. That night, from the water, survivors watched their town burn. Flames climbed from wooden storefronts to palm trees to the dark sky above, reflected on the surface of the Pacific like a second fire burning upside down. Historic streets, homes, churches, and centuries-old banyan trees that had shaded generations of families were reduced to a gray, ash-covered landscape by morning. Scientists and investigators are careful in how they describe what went wrong. They point to a chain of factors: damaged or downed power lines likely sparking ignition, invasive grasses turning abandoned sugar fields into ready kindling, water systems and emergency alerts failing under stress, and a warming climate that deepened drought and heat, priming the island for fire. No single cause is enough on its own, but together they created what one analysis called the perfect setup for a catastrophe in a place that never believed it could burn like this. For many native Hawaiians, the blaze was more than an environmental disaster. Lahaina was once the royal capital of the Hawaiian kingdom, a place of kings, covenants, and cultural memory. To see that ground soaked in history, prayer, and struggle lit up like a torch felt. To some, like more than random chance, it felt like a wound to the soul of the islands. From a biblical perspective, the progression is painfully symbolic. In Pennsylvania, fire traced unseen lines beneath the ground, exposing what we had buried. In Maui, fire consumed what we could see and touch homes, histories, and the illusion that some places are too beautiful to break. Scripture often warns that what we build, no matter how impressive, will one day be tested as through fire. Not only our structures, but our priorities, our justice, and our care for the vulnerable. No one can honestly say God sent this fire to Hawaii to make a point. But when paradise burns because neglected systems, altered lands, and a changing climate all converge, the question shifts. It is no longer just, how did this happen? It becomes, what have we done with the paradise God entrusted to us? Before we continue, if you sometimes see God uses the world itself to wake us up, comment, I see. Your words matter, so help us. Ring the notification bell to spread them. The fires in the streets of Lahaina can devour what we see. And what's more unsettling is that it's still not the only way creation answers back. This time, what nature has bestowed, like fertile land, has been swept away as quickly as the fleeting moment of a party. As much of America looked up to watch fireworks, Central Texas was quietly loading a different kind of display. Thunderstorms built over the hill country, then locked in place. Between midnight and dawn, as families slept in lakeside cabins and riverside camps, as tents and picnic tables still stood from celebrations, the sky opened. In the Guadalupe River Basin, rain fell at extraordinary rates, 2 to 4 inches an hour, in some locations, adding up to as much as 170 millimeters in just 3 hours near the town of Hunt. The ground, baked hard by a recent dry spell, could not drink it in. Instead, the water ran off the hills like sheets of glass, funneling into creeks and canyons that have earned this region a stark nickname: Flash Flood Alley. Just after hours, river gauges began to spike. At one station on the Guadalupe, the water surged more than 26 feet in just 45 minutes, rising from a familiar nighttime flow to a roaring wall that tore trees from the banks, ripped homes from their foundations, and flipped vehicles like toys. Many lost as people were missing or swept away in the dark from river camps, vacation rentals, and small towns that had gone to sleep under clear skies. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, survivors stepped out to a landscape they struggled to recognize. Streets in normally dry inland towns ran thick with red-brown water, winding between mailboxes and half-submerged trucks. Front yards became channels. Church parking lots became shallow lakes. Out on the floodplain, pastures and baseball fields disappeared beneath a slow, churning sheet of mud. On phone cameras, under the copper light of evening, the water seemed to take on an even deeper hue. More than one voice in the background could be heard saying the same three words: "It looks like blood." The color, hydrologists are quick to say, has a simple explanation. Central Texas soils are rich in iron and clays. When violent runoff scours hillsides, creek beds, and freshly disturbed construction sites, it loads the water with sediment and organic matter. But even the scientists add a second sentence now. This kind of rain, they say, is no longer something we can chalk up to bad luck alone. Studies of the event found that present-day Texas air is warmer and moister than in the past, capable of holding around 7% more water vapor for each degree of warming. Climate attribution models estimate that human-driven warming made the rainfall 20 to 30% more intense than it would have been decades ago, enough to turn a damaging flood into a catastrophe that overwhelmed rivers, roads, and rescue systems. So yes, the red water has a scientific cause. Iron in the soil, hardened ground, a stalled storm, a warmer atmosphere. A river corridor long known for deadly flash floods. But the question that lingered in Texas after the sirens quieted was not just, how did this happen? It was, why do the streets of a proud inland town washed in something that looks like diluted blood feel like it's trying to tell us something we don't want to hear? On the surface, this is the Texas most people know. BBQ smoke and country music, Friday night lights in stadiums, tidy neighborhoods with flags still hanging from porches after the holiday. Beneath the surface, another Texas has been taking shape for years. Long droughts, followed by sudden floods, forgotten trailer parks, and river camps hugging the banks. Workers and families living closest to the water, because that is where land is cheapest, and where risk pools quietly until a night like this. For readers of Scripture, the visuals are hard to separate from old stories. The Bible once described a river turning to blood, not as a horror show, but as a wake-up call to a nation that would not listen any other way. Not every Red River is a repeat of that moment. This flood in Texas did not literally turn water into blood. But when water, normally the symbol of life and blessing, suddenly looks like a stain, it naturally raises a softer but piercing question. What price are we paying for the way we live? Blood-red water here does not mean God poured blood from the sky over Texas. It may mean that the true cost of our choices is finally being written on the surface where everyone can see it. In neighborhoods that thought they were safe, in families who never imagined the river could rise that fast, on walls still marked by a brown-red line long after the water is gone. If this were only about sediment, the videos would have faded from memory by now. But the image of red water sliding past decorations, past yards where flags still hang limp and muddy, has stayed with many longer than any climate chart or policy debate. A nation celebrated one evening. A few hours later, the natural world quietly redrew the boundary of where its power stops. So the question is not simply, was this climate change? Or, was this a sign? It is, are we only interested in draining it away and rebuilding? Or are we willing to ask what, exactly, God and His creation are trying to wake us up to? Floods can strip away what we have built in a single night. But there are other places in the world where, instead of water erasing everything, one small light refuses to go out quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. Far to the north, along a rugged stretch of Alaskan coast, where winter dominates most of the year, hikers and fishermen speak of a strange, almost tender, anomaly. In a landscape of snow, rock, and bitter wind, there is a crack in the earth where a tiny flame has been burning for as long as anyone can remember. A flicker of orange and gold that survives storms which shut down entire towns. By daylight, it is easy to miss. The shrine is nothing more than a rough outcrop of stone, darkened by soot, tucked into a slope that spends most of the year locked in ice and gray cloud. Only when you get close enough do you hear it. A faint hiss, the whisper of gas escaping from somewhere deep below. Someone, long ago, brought a match to that whisper. The flame caught, and somehow it stayed. Scientists describe it as a natural gas seep, one of a handful of eternal flames known on Earth. Deep beneath the surface, ancient organic matter has been locked inside layers of rock for millions of years. Under heat and pressure, it broke down into methane and other combustible gases. Those gases, seeking a way out, found tiny fractures and faults that lead upward toward the open air. When the concentration of methane is high enough and the flow is steady, a geologist explains, all it takes is a single ignition event to sustain a flame that can burn for years or even centuries as long as the gas keeps coming. Unlike the burning streams of Pennsylvania or the fires of Maui, this flame is not racing, devouring, or destroying. It does not threaten homes. It does not show up on satellite fire maps. Most days, hardly anyone passes by. Yet, in one sense, it is more stubborn than any wildfire. Year after year, when blizzards bury roads and sea ice crushes along the shore, that small tongue of fire keeps shining against the stone. For those who stumble upon it, the effect is often disorienting. The human eye expects cold to match its surroundings. Ice, darkness, breath, turning to vapor in the air. To find instead a pocket of warmth in the middle of so much desolation is to feel, for a moment, like you have walked into a story instead of a map. Some visitors describe it as eerie. Others, without quite knowing why, lower their voices when they approach. From a scientific standpoint, nothing about this is magic. Natural gas seeps have been documented in New York, Turkey, Iraq, and other parts of the world. Researchers even use them as indicators of intense underground emissions. But the Bible-reading mind will almost inevitably reach for another language. A lamp that does not go out, a bush that burns but is not consumed, an ember of faith or mercy that survives in a landscape that feels otherwise frozen. After watching rivers rise and turn the color of diluted blood in Texas, it is tempting to think that every sign must come as a disaster. The eternal flame in Alaska suggests something gentler, that not all warnings are shouted, and not all messages come wrapped in catastrophe. Sometimes, God may allow a small, quiet symbol to stand in the cold, a reminder that even when societies flood, burn, or freeze, He can keep a spark alive where no one expects it. Is this specific flame a sign from God? No one can say that with certainty. But the question it raises sits right next to the question Texas left us with. If God allows one tiny fire to burn on in the most unlikely place, what does that say about the small things we have given up on prayer in a secular culture, kindness in a hard economy, faith in a cynical age? In a world of floods and wildfires, a single persistent flame in the snow might be asking us something simple. Before we assume everything is too cold, too dark, or too far gone, are we willing to notice that God still knows how to keep a light burning quietly, stubbornly, in places we had already written off? Taken together, these four scenes sketch a pattern that is hard to dismiss. It is not just that nature is acting up. It is that creation keeps touching exactly the places we would rather keep abstract. Our use of buried energy, our illusion of paradise, our confidence in national strength, our quiet despair that anything good can still endure, streams catching fire where old decisions were hidden, a resort town losing even the basic conditions for life, a proud inland region watching its streets run red, and a tiny flame persisting in the cold. All of them press the same question from different angles. Are these only the random byproducts of geology, weather, and climate? Or is there also a moral story being told through them about what we treasure, what we ignore, and what God may be patiently trying to bring back to our attention before the next chapter begins? It began, as these things often do now, with short, shaky videos and confused captions. Over Oregon, in the deep cold of a winter night, residents in towns like Bend and Redmond stepped outside and saw vertical beams of light rising from the horizon columns that appeared to shoot straight into the darkness, like silent searchlights reaching for something beyond the clouds. They hung there for minutes at a time, hundreds of them in some places, shimmering above parking lots, farm fields, and quiet neighborhoods. From the ground, the effect was eerie. The lights did not move like airplanes or satellites. They did not fan out like fireworks. They simply stood, pale and motionless, a forest of glowing pillars suspended in the frozen air. One driver pulled to the side of the road and whispered on camera, "It looks like the sky has grown 1,000 towers." A few days later, and nearly 2,000 miles away, the sky over Chicago offered a different, but equally unsettling, display. On a frigid evening along Lake Michigan, commuters looked up to find the city's usual glow bent into strange forms, ring-like halos around the moon, bright mock suns on either side of the real one at dusk, and faint columns of light seeming to stretch upward from skyscrapers and street lamps into the low, icy clouds. In social media clips, people can be heard asking the same questions. Is this normal? Why does it feel wrong? Is anybody else seeing this? Atmospheric scientists have clear, careful names for these spectacles.